You know, in the history of ideas, there are these incredible moments when a student, a devoted disciple even, turns and completely rethinks the work of their master. Today, we're diving deep into one of the biggest of them all, Carl Jung's profound revision of Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis. And we're not talking about a small squabble here. This was a fundamental shift in how we understand the very source of our psychological suffering.
Right off the bat, we need to get one thing straight. Jung, who was once seen as Freud's heir apparent, didn't come up with these ideas sitting in an ivory tower. As he says right here, his critique wasn't some academic debate. No, this was forged in the fire of clinical practice. It was hammered out over a decade of working with real patients, where the old theories just weren't cutting it anymore.
So, to really get the sheer scale of Jung's revision, we first have to understand the theory he was revising. Let's start at the beginning, with Freud's original and honestly revolutionary explanation for what causes a neurosis. The original idea was beautifully simple. A neurosis, like hysteria, was basically rooted in a specific psychic wound from the past, a trauma. The therapy, called the cathartic method, was almost like psychological surgery. You find the trauma, you release the blocked emotional energy, you abreact it, and poof, the symptom vanishes. The idea was simple, right? The problem's buried in the past, so the cure is to dig it up. But here's the thing about Freud. He was a brilliant investigator, and he followed the evidence. So his theory evolved. First, the simple trauma theory gave way to the idea of repression, that we actively push away painful memories. This led him to focus on sexual trauma in childhood as the root cause. But then came a bombshell. Freud discovered that many of these so-called traumatic memories, well, they never actually happened. They were fantasies. And that discovery was a huge blow to a theory built on a real historical event. This was a real crisis. I mean, think about it. If the fantasy of an event can be just as powerful as the event itself, then where is the illness actually coming from? The whole clean cause and effect chain was broken. And this very question is the fork in the road. It's where Freud and Jung start to head into very different directions. And that brings us to the absolute heart of their disagreement, the nature of psychic energy itself. Seriously, if you want to understand the split between Freud and Jung, you have to understand their profoundly different ideas about libido. Okay, so for Freud, libido was, at its core, sexual energy. It was the engine driving everything, and when you repressed it or misdirected it, you got a neurosis. But Jung, he looked at that and said, hold on, that's way too narrow. For Jung, libido wasn't specifically sexual at all. It was a general, undifferentiated life force, a will to live. It's just pure psychic energy that can be applied to anything, your job, your creativity, your spirituality, and yeah, your sexuality too. What Jung was trying to do here was pretty ambitious. He wanted to do for psychology what the law of the conservation of energy did for physics. Instead of all these separate drives, he imagined a single, unified psychic energy. It just changes its form. It gets redirected, but it's never lost. This whole concept of a dynamic, transferable energy becomes the absolute cornerstone of his entire system. So with this new model of psychic energy in his back pocket, Jung offered a completely revolutionary answer to that question of what causes a neurosis. He shifts the spotlight entirely, away from the distant past and onto the immediate present. And here it is, Jung's big idea in a nutshell. A neurosis is not some ghost from your childhood haunting you. It's a symptom that you are failing to meet a necessary life challenge in the here and now. It's a task of adaptation that your personality is trying to dodge. The problem isn't what happened back then, it's what you are failing to do now. So how does that work? How does avoiding something today create all these strange symptoms? Well, Jung called the process regression. Imagine your libido. Your life energy is a river flowing forward. But when it hits a big obstacle, a tough decision, a necessary sacrifice, a challenge you just shrink from, it gets blocked. The energy can't move forward. So where does it go? It flows backward. It regresses, and it pours all that energy back into old infantile ways of thinking and old fantasies.
This is probably the most elegant and powerful idea in this whole discussion. Let me say it again, because it's that important. The patient's personal history, their childhood, their complexes, that explains the form of the neurosis. It explains why it shows up as a specific phobia or a particular obsession. But the energy, the fuel that's actually driving the neurosis, that comes from the present conflict. The past is the stage set, but the present is the drama that's unfolding on it.
Now, theory is great, but a real-world example makes this so much clearer. Let's go back to that case of the young woman with the phobia of horses. Under the old trauma theory, her case was a total mystery. But from Jung's perspective, it's a perfect illustration of regression at work. So you've got this woman, right? The facts of the case just don't add up. There's this supposed childhood trauma with horses, but it lies dormant for 18 years. Then, one day, a totally harmless cab triggers a massive panic attack. And here's the kicker. She had been perfectly calm during an actual life-threatening event. The trauma theory just has no answer for this. Why now? And why a cab?
So Jung comes in and decodes the whole thing. First, the real conflict. She was stuck in an impossible love triangle, a huge life task she couldn't face. Second, her failure to adapt. She just avoided making a decision. Third, her libido regressed. That river of energy started flowing backward. Fourth, this backward flow of energy lit up that old, dormant memory of the bolting horses. And finally, the symptom appeared. Her panic wasn't about the cab. It was a symbolic performance of her inner conflict. The image of bolting horses was the perfect dramatic metaphor for her own runaway passions and the feeling that she was heading for a disaster she couldn't control.
So if you completely change the theory of what causes the problem, you naturally have to completely change the theory of how to fix it. If the problem isn't really in the past, then digging around in the past forever can't be the solution. And that sets up two completely different jobs for the therapist. The old view was basically archaeology. The goal was to dig up some historical cause. Jung's view is more like a strategist. The goal is to identify a current challenge that's being avoided. Therapy is no longer about explaining the past. It's about understanding why the patient's energy is flowing backward, so you can help them redirect it toward the tasks of today. And Jung himself just puts it so perfectly here. He says, the question is no longer about cataloging your childhood issues, because, let's be honest, we all have them. The real therapeutic question, the one that unlocks the whole thing, is forward-looking. What task, what difficulty is this person trying to avoid right now?
And that really leaves us with a powerful question to ask ourselves. Jung's Great Revision isn't just history, it's a practical tool for self-reflection. When we find ourselves stuck, spinning our wheels in old anxieties or patterns, this whole framework invites us to ask a really honest question. Are we truly being haunted by a ghost from the past? Or are we using that ghost as an elaborate, unconscious excuse to avoid a real and present challenge that life is asking us to face, right here, right now?